Hey guys, my name is Toby and welcome to Adobe Photoshop CC 2014. Now today we're going to be taking a look around the interface of Adobe Photoshop and showing you kind of where things are in the program. So if you're just starting out with Adobe Photoshop, this is probably the perfect place to jump in. So this is kind of what Photoshop will look like when you first open it up. And this is using what was called a Workspace. So if you go up to the Window tab, you can go to Workspaces and it will be on Essentials default, and I've reset this so that we've got the basic kind of layout that you'll be presented with when you first open Photoshop. Now, before we can really do anything, we do need to open up a picture. So I'm going to do this there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can go to File, Open, or Open Recent, or anything like that, and kind of do it that way, which is the same as most bits of software, so, Word, anything like that. Or if you navigate to it in either Windows Explorer or Finder, you could actually just drag and drop, which is my preferred way of doing it. I find that a little bit easier than having to go through lots of files and folders and everything. You can actually open up multiple images at once. So there is one thing to be aware of though, because Photoshop works with tabs. If you look what happens, if I drag this second picture and I drag it into Photoshop, it's actually opened it up into the same tab. And if you look in our layers panel down here, which we'll talk about more in a moment, we've got two layers in here now. So I'm just going to hit backspace to get rid of that. If you want to open it up as a completely separate image, you need to drag it into this toolbar section up here, and then it will open it up as a separate tab. Now, you don't have to keep them as tabs. If you want to drag things down and out, you can actually have them as their own little windowed items, but I generally find that working in tabs is kind of a little bit better, namely because something like that can happen where you actually lose the other image. So okay, so we've got an image to work on now. So let's talk about this area here on the left, which is your toolbar. And as you'll notice, basically what these do is they will all give you a slightly different cursor, and it will change what your mouse does. And there's quite a lot of different options down here. Not every single one has a completely different icon with the mouse, but some of them do, some of them don't. Anyway, they all change the function of how your mouse behaves and what it does. Now, each one of these will have a selection of tools along this top bit here, which will change based on what tool you have selected. So a lot of the time, for instance, if we look at something like the paintbrush tool, you can change sort of the brush size, and you can change what the tip of it looks like, and all sorts of things like that. A lot of the time, if you're trying to find like a function that you think a tool should be able to do, there's a good chance that it can actually do it, but you have to put the right settings in up the top. Okay, so let's talk about the right hand side now, and what we've got, as I mentioned, is our layers tab. Now this is probably one of the most important windows that you're going to have in Photoshop, because it's kind of how your image is constructed and put together. Generally speaking, if I just go and we'll open up another image into this one, and it comes up with these little crosses over it, so I'm going to have to hit enter or return to place that, and now we have two layers. And the way this works is that anything that's kind of on top in the layers panel will be on top in your picture. So if I click the eyeball, I can turn that on and off to reveal the background layer. Now if we've got this one on and we turn the background layer off, you're not going to see anything change because this layer is kind of obscuring it. If we were to erase part of this, or better yet, let's just move it out of the way a little bit. If you see checkerboard, that means there's nothing there, basically. That's Photoshop's way of telling you this space is empty. But if we turn that on, you can kind of see what's going on here. And if we were to put this layer on top, you can kind of see how that works. It's fairly simple, but sometimes you can have hundreds of layers in here and it can get very complicated, but in a simple example like this, it's fairly easy to see what's going on. Along the very bottom of this tab, you've got a series of little icons that all do different things, which are anything from adding different effects to grouping them into folders, creating new layers, or just trashing them all together. So I'm actually just going to trash this top layer. It's going to ask me if I want to delete it, and I'm going to click yes. And that is that. You also have channels, which is sometimes useful, but I wouldn't worry about that one for now, and paths, which is also sometimes useful. Libraries is a way of kind of storing files that you might use a lot of the time. I generally don't find this tool very helpful, so what I'm actually going to do is if you right click on any tab, you can close. If you close the tab group, what that means is that all of these tabs and this whole little box area will kind of disappear. So I'm actually just going to right click, close that libraries one. Adjustments, this is, I find, quite a useful one to have up because I use this one a fair amount. What this will let you do is add what's called an adjustment layer over the top of your image, and anything underneath this layer will be affected by it, and then you can change some things with your image. And this isn't a great example, but it kind of gives you an idea of how that kind of works. We'll talk about that more in depth another time, so I'm just going to delete that again. Oh no, and delete the layer as well. There we go. Styles, this is kind of another one that's not very useful. I don't find an awful lot of use for this one. It kind of just, it lets you do some really odd, not particularly helpful things, I find, so it's not a great tab. So again, this is another one that I don't have open. What I do have open on this little area though, and I will point out that this isn't set in stone. You can actually drag all these out and, you know, have it so that you can rearrange these and kind of literally do what you want with them. I mean, you can have like a second set of tabs there. You can really go to town in customizing this and changing it up to be whatever you want it to be. But I quite like having a sort of a 3-tab setup. Well, I generally make layers a little bit bigger so I can see what's going on down there. So on this one instead, I like to have one called Actions. And Actions is quite a cool tab, so I'm just going to drag this one out and I'm going to pop it onto there. And what this lets you do is it gives you a series of preset tools where you can get it to run certain functions in Photoshop kind of for you. And you can do some very clever things with it, but sometimes it's, you know, it's just got some basic ones. Let's see what that does. So this one has added a adjustment layer automatically with some preset settings to give a certain look. So if you want to achieve the same look in a number of photos, you can, rather than have to sit there and do every single step every single time, you can program Photoshop to just do it for you. And that, you know, I wouldn't worry about that to begin with if you're not keen on the idea, but there you go. So that's generally what I have open there. Now the top one, I don't have either of these open. You have the color tab, and the reason I don't have this open is because if you double click or even single click on this area down here, it brings up kind of your colors for your brush. Now the thing is, this is exactly what this does. And yes, it is kind of handy, being if you look down here you can see the brush color changing. It is kind of handy to be able to have this right there all the time, but I mean, generally speaking, if you want to change your brush, you can just click and do it there. So it's not too hard to get to another way. So I don't have that there. I also don't have swatches. Now swatches is a way of kind of storing custom colors. So this is maybe good if you do a lot of digital painting or something like that, or you know that you're going to need to return to a very specific color. So what you can do is let's make a nice green color. And then you can click this little button here. This is the icon for new something or other in Photoshop. So it's the same one down that. That one is new layer. This one is new swatch. And that'll crop up a couple of times in Photoshop. But that's like a make a new version of whatever this is attached to button, if that makes sense. So if I click this, it's going to ask us to make a new swatch. And we could name this, but I'm not going to bother. And then that color has appeared down there. And now you can go back to that particular color at any time. Whoops. And if you kind of click through these, it keeps like a track of your most recent ones that you've used. So if you do a lot of digital painting, I can see how that maybe would be good, but not for me, thank you. So I actually don't use those. What I have there instead, so you come into Window, I like to have the histogram there. So I'm going to put that up there instead. And I'm just going to close color as well. Now, the histogram, this is very useful for photography because it gives you a way of understanding kind of what your image is doing. So if I were to brighten up our picture, he says, it's going to change kind of the information readout on there. And then it looks a little bit scary, but once you kind of understand what it is that Photoshop is doing and how to read this graph, then it's quite a handy thing to do. Basically, well, it's a way of telling you if your image is too bright or too dark, or if you have certain issues with highlights and things like that. So I find it very helpful to have that open. And then the rest of the functions that you're generally going to find in Photoshop can be found kind of along these tabs. Now the ones to be, if you're looking for effects, you can go to Image, Adjustments, and then you've got a whole range of different things you can do here. So you can do all sorts of things. So we can apply a green filter to our picture and give that a weird look. You can go to let's have a think. You could go to hue and saturation and you could make it even more colorful, or you could make it less colorful, or something like that. And you've got lots and lots of options in there to do cool stuff to your picture. But you can also get to those from there and do them as layers rather than just applying the effect. So there's a couple of ones in there that aren't here, but they generally do the same thing. So for instance, you've got one called curves. So we can do a curves adjustment here, or we could do a curves adjustment here. And they do the same thing, except that this one will create a layer. Okay, now sometimes what you might find is that you make a load of changes and you actually want to go back a few steps. So what you can do, and I used to have this out as a full tab, but I more recently have found it more useful to keep it here, is this little icon here is your history, and it's generally quite good to have this a little bit longer, I find. But what this will let you do is it shows every single change that I have made to this picture since we opened it. Now, the thing with this is you can set it to have more or less, but the more you have, the slower your computer will run. You can only go back a certain number of steps. So for instance, if I sat here with a paintbrush, every time I draw and click, it's going to add a function. So if I do that a whole bunch of times, what you're going to find is that now I can't go back. So let's do a few more. There we go, that's probably enough. I can't go back past that brush stroke. So that is now baked in. The only way to go back further than that is to click on this bit up here, which will take us back to the image as it was when it opened. So it doesn't store every single edit undo, but it does store, it stores a relatively good number. And like I say, you can change this to make it store more, but I wouldn't advise it. It sounds like a good idea, but the more kind of memory states it has to have, it will mean your computer will kind of have to slow down because it has to try and remember what all of them were. And I think that is more... Oh no, okay, so the only other one we didn't talk about, which you might want to know straight away, is the filters. Now this is the kind of go-to area I find when you first start using Photoshop. This is where you go. And you've got things like the filter gallery. So if we open this up. Okay, so if we zoom out on our picture here a little bit, you can see we have got a whole bunch of wacky things that we can do to our picture. And you can really go nuts with these. They all have their own settings, so you can kind of, you know, get some really odd looks. I must admit, these ones are a little bit odd. But you can do some kind of just preset, very easy, very quick edits to your picture. So we just hit OK there. You can see that we've now made it go all blocky for some reason. And you know, that is a perfectly good use of filters. But and as you can see, because we've gone back to our beginning, we've now, it's got where we applied the filter gallery. I mean, I've just clicked accidentally onto the brush, but we can go back to how it started. And that, yeah, that's really about it. I mean, you've got the filter gallery. Liquify's a fun one if you want to play with that. And then you've just got lots of clever little tools down here that all do different things. And I encourage you to have a play with these. I find with Photoshop, the best way to learn is just to play with stuff. See what it does. So you can go, okay, what does pinch do? And then you can see that it's like, you can sort of click in here. You should be able to click in there. You can kind of really do some weird things with it if you want. Yeah. And I think that is about going to do it. So I hopefully have shown you a few of the cool hidden things in Photoshop that you might not have been aware of. Have a play with them, see how you get on. But I think for now, that is me done. So thank you very much for watching. My name's Toby, and we'll see you next time.